And we're not going to have that funny glare either.
There you go. Alrighty, welcome back everyone to episode 2.
Hey guys.
Hope you're having fun. We continued to chat and chat and chat last time, and we ran out of time to cover some of these other topics about social media. So we are going to dive a little bit deeper into some of these details today. We are talking about how do you decide what social media platforms to be on? How do you track whether it's effective? And really, is it worth your time as a company or business to be putting in this level of time and effort into organic social media? Uh, yeah,
Yeah, which is super big too, because I think because sometimes companies and corporations and even small businesses get kind of pigeonholed into vanity numbers. They often think, I want 500,000 subscribers. And I think we talked about this the other day. Like 500,000 subscribers is great. But if you're only having less than a quarter, possibly a fraction, like say out of 500,000, 1,000 are interacting with your post and less than are liking your post, that's not really a good reflection onto the business. Sometimes it shows that your audience isn't engaging with what you're creating, which is a good way to measure your KPIs too. Like when you're looking to grow your business, whether it's on social media or any platform, you always have to think, how do I want to grow? Vanity numbers don't matter. Having 500 followers and 250 of those followers interact with your post, your business, and everything on a consistent basis is more powerful than having 2.5 million followers and you just end up and your post and content just end up being snubbed. It's like, oh, it's here, and they don't really see or want to engage with anything that you're creating on the content, on the
for
media.
sure. I was listening to a Seth Godin book, and I think it was actually This Is Marketing, and I just started listening to it like I don't know late last year. Surprisingly, having been doing this for as long as I have been. But one of the things he said in it was you want to try and find your smallest addressable market.
Yes.
So if that's like 1,000 people who are deeply connected to you and like sing your praises and think you're amazing, that is far better than having 100,000 people who, again, like you're saying, don't engage. The weird thing is that society is kind of weird, and I'm even like guilty of this as well. I'm like, oh, this person must seems pretty successful. They must have a lot of authority because they have 100,000 followers or 1,000,000 followers, right? Like they must know what they're talking about if that many people are following them. Um, but there is so many ways to like fake that as well in terms of getting like fake followers or like things out there, systems out there will like send you followers or it'll be bots or like what have you, right? So yeah, it's fascinating how even knowing all of the metrics and knowing people can 100% fake this, if you have 100,000 followers, some for whatever reason I think you're way more authoritative than the person who has 100 followers.
I think it has a lot to do with when you see that huge number, you think you have power. Like followers is kind of like buying power, right? Like no
Mhm.
one's going to take you seriously if you walk into like a car dealership and say I have $2,000. It's like, okay, that's a down payment. Everybody takes you seriously if you walk in and you're like, hey, I have 20 plus $1,000. A follower account is basically your buying power. It's people know that if they companies, corporations, even other influencers know if they make a mistake with you, if they mistreat you, they understand that could hurt their brand. And Godin is a really because I was listening to one of his podcasts recently, and he talked about how he wrote a book and he was a bestseller, but less than 1% of people bought his book. So less than 1% of Americans bought his book, but he was still considered successful because the people who bought his book engaged and interacted with it, which I thought
Mhm.
was amazing. And it does pose the question for a lot of businesses and corporations too, like if you do want to be on social media or you do want to do social media part marketing, what platforms are best for you? I know that a lot of influencers out there and people will often tell you, you should be on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, but they don't really tell you how exhausting it is to craft content for that, especially if you're looking to pump out quality content versus quantity, right? Like nowadays you don't need a high production team to make content. Actually, people are more influenced by the down to earth phone to screen approach versus having like a high production team behind it. People know that you're now marketing to them. It's just they now have the ability to choose if they want to be marketed to. And you really have to decide, like, okay, well, who's my target audience and which platforms are best for me. If you're looking to do more B2B and maybe connect with professionals, LinkedIn would be the way to go. But do you need to make YouTube videos? Do you need to add an extra, do you need to add that extra step in there? Because YouTube is now editing, and then you have to curate content, and then you have to make shorts, and not to mention like 7 to 10 videos, 7 to 10 minute long videos if you want to see a return on that too. So it's a really big question. Like, if you do want to market on social media, what platforms are best for you? And I think a lot of businesses don't ask themselves that question.
Exactly. A lot of people think you do 100% need to show up everywhere. I'm kind of like of the philosophy that you should be on either end of the spectrum,
Hmm.
both with the volume of posting and I guess the quality too. So you can do that phone to screen, very authentic,
Yeah.
live, what we're doing now.
Mhm.
Take your phone out while you're on a walk, go record it, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. You can have that side of things. Or you can take it all the way to the other side where you're throwing in all of those graphics to enhance what you're talking about,
Mhm.
your change of screens, lots of edits, lots of jump cuts, perfect
Mhm.
lighting, great background. Like you can take it to the other side as well. Um, and again, to say one performs better than the other is hard. It's more about your communication style and I guess who you are targeting. Like if you are targeting really high professional people, you probably want it to be a little bit more professional. But
Mhm.
if your content is just like maybe in the DM, you're actually just sending a video and saying, hey, saw you followed me. Thanks for following me. Uh, Here's who I am. I'm a real person, kind of a thing. I actually got that once a really long time ago from a salesperson.
Really?
And I was also, yeah, he was like a peer of mine, essentially. I was also a salesperson at the time. I'm like, oh, that's such a cool idea. Like somebody new followed me. And I got that the other day on LinkedIn too. It was not as well done because it wasn't personalized. It was actually just a link to a YouTube video that he had uploaded
Mhm.
from in 2021, actually, of all times. So I'm like, oh, this is clearly old, but I guess it's a little bit unique or whatever, right? So I don't know, trying to make that personalized connection there is good too. And so when it's personalized and off the cuff like that, lower quality is okay. And then in the other end of the spectrum, the volume, the amount of things, like we're at the point with AI and automations where it's very easy to generate hundreds of pieces of content in a single click of a button, really. And that includes like the images that go with it, the graphics, like everything like that, right? And so
Mhm.
you can send things all the way to that end. In fact, I'm experimenting with that on one of my Instagram accounts now. Or you can do the personalized touch, the things that take a little bit longer. Um, and it's just really about like whether you see an ROI, right? Like the one thing takes me 5 minutes, and so it's much easier to see revenue generated from that if it takes me only 5 minutes to do, as an
Mhm.
example, versus something that took me an hour to put together, and maybe it gets 5 times the number of likes, but that's not 20 times the number of likes that you'd need to have the equivalent ROI, right? Or clicks to my website or purchases or sales, right? So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting how you can take it both ways, I think.
It is interesting because it shows that there's not, like, a lot of people think content and the path to making good content is very linear. And sometimes a lot of people are kind of like, their mindset and companies' mindsets are, their bubble is, and their perception is popped because this one person did this one thing. It becomes a hot trend, and now everybody just wants to be able to do it. And they're like, well, we have to do this trend, and why did this get performed, but I'm making this type of content? It's like, well, there's not one way to make content. But you realize that one of the biggest reasons, there is one common factor, one of the biggest factors as to why these trends get bigger and why they become successful, is because they're relatable and easy, right? Like, when things, audiences want to feel connected, and that goes into that personalization aspect we talked about, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
generating more personal content, for me, in my personal opinion, that's the best way any company can go, because it's better to post 3 times a week with your own brand and voice and develop that, and develop an organic following. And maybe you do have a bigger team and your guys want to push, 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 go, 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 and that's great. But, and you, people are more likely to see your post and maybe like, comment, and engage with it, which is great. But at one point, do you have to ask yourself and realize, are we generating content because this is something we feel personally passionate about, or is this or just direction we want to go? Are we just generating content to stay relevant? And relevancy is super hard. And when it comes into ROIs, it's always important to know, what are your measurable KPIs? Like what
Mhm.
are you measuring? And a lot of people have different mindsets on this, different philosophy of this. In my personal opinion, there are four, and you need to be specific, how you're going to measure, make sure the goals are obtainable, and how they're relevant to your business. So be specific about your KPIs. Like, what do you want in the next 3 months? It can be simple as I want a consistent 5 to 10 to 15 likes on every post I make. That's small, but at the same time, it's really good, right? Like, not a lot of people, especially small businesses, are generating 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 likes on Instagram and other platform. And that's also, and then what tools are you going to use to measure them? Which then trickles down into, are they obtainable? I mean, I've worked with clients before and they're like, hey, within the next 2 months, I would love to get 500 more followers and then get 250 likes per post. And I'm like, okay, do we have the team and money and budget to do that? Like, I'm not saying it's impossible, but is it obtainable? Can you reach that KPI? Is it even within the scope of everything you want to do? And then is it relevant to your business also? Like, is the type of content you're going to have to make relevant to you? Or
Mhm.
are you just making content just to make it?
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I mean, we're kind of still at the beginning of the year here, end of January, but it's like New Year's resolutions, right? I feel like that's sometimes the case with content. It's, I want to go and put all this content out. I feel like I can, film these like 3 to 5 videos a week, and I'm really energized and motivated to do it. But then people like fall off track. They don't stick with it. So, like, what's actually realistic for you on the amount of content that you could record or put out there, right? And you and your team, I suppose, right? Like, what does that actually look like? And I think, yeah, having reasonable expectations for the amount of effort and resources you can put into it makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And sometimes it doesn't take a lot, right? It's just more about consistency than anything. Like, sometimes if you put too much into the type of content that you want to make rather than just making content that's relatable to your brand and your company and your business, it kind of puts you into like a content block. There's writer's block where you're like, I don't know what to write. There's like content block. It's like, I don't know what to create. And it's like, no, just be yourself. Like, who's the face to the brand? Is it you? Is it the people? Is it the logo? And then just, you can do so much with that if you're just down to earth and personable.
Mhm.
That's why, in my personal opinion, I always feel that when starting, choose to. I just say that you don't need to be on every social media platform yet, because that's just too much work. Choose two social media platforms: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Pick, just choose two, and then think about the type of content you'd want to create, and then grow it from there. And then, like I said, set obtainable goals. We're going to consistently post content for 2 to 4 months, 3 times a week. And then we're going to measure. And then we'd like to grow our audience by 200, 250 to 500 people. Are we working with a budget? Are we not working with a budget? Right? Because those are also factors too. If you don't have a
Mhm.
budget, then you're going to have to think of a way to organically grow your content, which is a great way, but it's also really hard. If you do have a budget, maybe you can run ads. Maybe like you have more exposure there. But what platform is your main hub? What platform is more important to you? Are both platforms just as equal, right? Are platforms linking back to each other? Are they communicating with one another? Are you making reels for Instagram, and then the reels you make on Instagram are the same you're putting on Facebook, or are they different? All of those things all work together, right? So start with two. And then once you feel comfortable and you're good with two, then move to three, then four. And then soon you'll be on all of them. And it doesn't take too much time. It sounds like a lot of time, but it's really not.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think especially once you have like your content operations process streamlined, it's a lot easier. That was actually like something that I read about and was like, oh, this is genius. Like, this is how I like to think about stuff, because I'm a very process person. I like to automate things. I like to, see a workflow and action that workflow. So as soon
Mhm.
as I heard about the idea of like content operations and like making all the things move through the pieces, I was like, this is way less overwhelming. And so I just even have like a checklist for myself of how everything gets all organized. One other, you know who Alex Ramosi is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of content king these days, if you will.
Mm.
He has been putting out tons and tons of content. And I was listening to a podcast. It was Christo and actually Layla Hormozy, and they spend. Oh, actually, guess. See if you can guess how much they spend collectively on content per month.
Ooh, okay, this is a good question. I am going to say, considering it's the content team, maybe it's less than 1,000. Maybe.
Less than $1,000 per month.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just gonna I'm gonna take a shot and say
You're
maybe.
radically off.
Oh,
Um, I think it was about 30 to 40K per month
really?
each. Yes, yes, that is their content team, between editing, filming, et cetera, on organic platforms. That is how much they said they spend, which is ludicrous to me.
That,
But it also kind of like leads into the idea of like what, okay, most people do not have that kind of budget. So then
Mhm,
like what do you do if you don't have that kind of budget? What can you expect, I guess, too, right?
mhm.
um Without that. And like he's done a presentation on it, and like literally it like hockey stick growth type of a thing once he started putting out that level of content. um and so it's kind of, yeah, that's why content operations excites me, because you can like super leverage your content. Yeah, maybe you're making a reel for one platform, but if you can set it up so that it can be a YouTube short and a TikTok video, that gets your extra pieces out there a little bit too. Or even this, right? There's plenty of systems out there, but this video ends up getting chopped up into different clips, which will get put out as reels and TikToks and shorts on YouTube, right? So it's like, how are you being the most effective with the resources that you have, I guess, as well. I think it's pretty
True,
important in your tracking. Yeah.
true, true. And I think that's something a lot of people don't think about or consider. I was working with a client once, and we had a long talk about the importance of taking long form video content and trying to figure out a way to get, because you can just an hour long video can give you 2 to 4 weeks worth of content if you know how to chop it up and do it right. Like,
Mhm.
because the whole point is recording the video and then editing the video, but then taking snippets that, okay, well, is this section something that's telling a complete thought that we can then put on social media that makes a point? Because at the end of the day, it's just storytelling, right? Like, that's all this is. Like, all content is telling a story, a beginning, middle, and end. Taking a snippet is just taking a chapter from that whole story and putting it up there and getting people interested in, like, oh, well, I like what they said. Okay, where can I read the full book? Where can I view the full article? Things of that sort. It is,
Mhm.
and it is interesting to hear that he's spending like 30, $40,000 on content. Jeez,
Right. Yeah.
that's
You bring up a good point though, and maybe next week we can dive into like different content formats, like, yeah, storytelling, but like humor, or should you use memes, or like, listicles, or like what types of content are you putting out there, and like frameworks for people to help generate that. I think that's a smart idea in our evolution of social media.
right, right, because social media is now growing. Like, it's coming to the point to where you can even see it on YouTube too, where content creators are just massive now. I think a report was released a few years ago where Gen Z listed that being an influencer was like the number one thing they wanted to do. So you have like people aging from 12 to 65 posting on social media wanting to be content creators, or just posting content because they can. So
Mhm.
in a market that's kind of, in a sense, saturated, slowly becoming oversaturated. Some people say it's becoming oversaturated, but I personally don't think so, because someone can start a social media and then drop it in like 2 to 3 months, right? Like, there's no consistency there. How do you stay relevant? Which goes back to the previous point, like posting content that is relevant to you is how you stay relevant in your niche, or just in general. It's it is interesting because even now, when you look at YouTube, there I feel like the screen has never been more crowded before, because you've got the video like here, and then on the right you've got, on the website, you've got the ad, and then you have all these videos, and then below that sometimes you have shorts, and then on the app you have the video, and then you have comments, and then you have sometimes shorts underneath the comments. it's so crowded because everyone's fighting for attention. So
Mhm.
that's also, I would love to dive into that
Yeah.
in the future talk, which we will. We totally will.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we will keep that in mind for next week. You make a good point on like competitiveness though, and we wanted to dive into kind of like the different stats on different platforms essentially. So
Yeah.
I didn't do comprehensive research, but apparently these guys did from Smart Insights. This is the 2023 article highlighting stats. 61.4% of the world's population uses social media for an average of 2 hours and 24 minutes per day. Do you think you're higher or lower than that per day?
According to my iPhone, I have a social media addiction. My iPhone's like, you spend 4 hours and an average of 4 hours a day on social media, which to be fair,
Okay.
it's because I'm watching like probably a TED talk or something, and those videos are like an hour.
Well, yeah, it's and I mean, as a marketer, I'm like, oh yeah, I can't, rely on that stat too much because like it's my job, right? Like you
Yeah.
try and hold that excuse. Or like I'm learning, right? I'm learning from these groups that I'm in or what the people are saying. So I can definitely see how it's like easy to get sucked in there as well. Um, all right. Top social media platforms in order most used, and this is worldwide. It goes Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, of all places, Instagram, WeChat, and then TikTok, apparently.
I
So that's kind of interesting to me.
My mind is still blown that WhatsApp is the third one. It has to be because of of like interpersonal communication.
Communication.
Yeah.
I think that's essentially what it is as well. Like, and because if the list if I keep going on it after TikTok is Facebook Messenger, which is again strictly communication,
Yeah.
Telegram, strictly communication, Snapchat, probably like I don't know, like 80% communication. Like that's kind of its initial purpose. It's not like about hey feed I'm gonna post. It's more one-to-one conversations. I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's
yeah.
like it's weird because it is about communication, but it's like a creative way to communicating through pictures and story. It's
Hmm.
literally
Hmm.
like take Instagram, what it used to be, and make it like a real photo sharing site where you're like, hey, just tap this picture and send it to your friends. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
I would,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, the fact that so many of those are like, yeah, what I would consider communication tools and not necessarily social media is kind of interesting. But yeah, at any rate, another, and this isn't on their report necessarily, but I did hear that at one point TikTok actually had the most page views for any website or domain, and that like is over Google, essentially, and like people searching for Google, and that's just because every new video that you flick up is a new page view. Um, yeah. So it's like, oh, you kind of hacked the system there. Not that anyone's really counting on that as the ranking metric for whatever, but I thought that was interesting as well.
I heard about that too, and sometimes I'm so skeptical. I'm like, does that count? I mean, I know it counts, but does that
Mhm.
count? Like, I've never looked at a TikTok video as like a page, especially since personally for me, like, I know you haven't been on TikTok in a while, but they're like blasting everybody with ads now. Like
Oh, jeez.
every three videos is a TikTok ad, a brand ad, or an ad for a template that you can use in TikTok. TikTok markets itself in
On TikTok?
yeah,
That's
I'm like,
funny.
why are you marketing a
Interesting.
template for me? So it's I would love to see the engagement on that
Hmm.
because because it's like what X is doing too. Have you seen what how X views like a video watched now?
No, I
Yes.
haven't.
Okay, so um in comparison to YouTube, right? Like YouTube for it to count as a full video watched, you
Hmm.
have to watch the entire video through. And for sometimes not sometimes, but I'm still, sometimes the YouTube algorithm flies over my head. But if I'm saying this correctly, for a YouTuber to get revenue from the ad, there's like different components that go into it. If you're watching a YouTube video and you skip that video, that YouTuber doesn't get ad revenue on that. You have to watch the video, you have to watch the ad all the way through, and then you have to engage with that. And then after that engagement, if you buy something off of it, like all that goes into the ad revenue. So
Okay.
X is now doing it to where a video watched is if you're sliding up and a video plays and you just keep sliding, that counts as like a watched video. So you could
Hmm.
post a video on X and you could technically get like 1,000 impressions, like 1,000 views on it because people saw your video, but no one's really interacting with it. But that's how people are getting impressions now on X, or that's rather how X would like
Okay.
to bring content creators in. So I'm interested to see in the engagement rates on that. I'm actually going to look that up later, like TikTok engagement, because I don't know.
Yeah. Huh. That is interesting because, well, in the view rate or whatever, like a while back, like at least 5 years ago or so, I want to say that Facebook kind of got in some trouble for misreporting like video views in that nature,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it's funny that they're now doing it again as if I don't know we're not smarter than that again or something. I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think they're able to get away with it because technically you're like the video is playing, right? Because on
Hmm.
Facebook, if I remember correctly, sometimes certain videos don't play unless you tap it, unless you're, doing like the Facebook story thing or their own
Hmm.
version of shorts. But on X and TikTok, a video is always playing. Like when you swipe it goes. So
Hmm.
technically you're watching the video. You may be watching it for like 2 seconds, but you're watching the video.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. Another cool graph they have here is the fastest growing social media networks. So this you'll have to look at this graph to like fully make it make sense. But the idea is that it has the all the platforms listed from like current popularity. So Facebook is first, has about 70% of user share, I guess, all the way down to like there's Twitter and Pinterest and Snapchat, all getting lower and lower, and like at the end is Be Real, which is like brand new or whatever too. So Facebook has grown by 1%, YouTube has dropped by 4%, and then Instagram is up by 6%, TikTok is up by 16%, and then we'll kind of like skim along. Reddit is actually down by 11%. LinkedIn
Impossible.
is up. Yeah, I know. LinkedIn is up by 20%. Be Real though, because it's like brand new and basically started from zero, is an increase of 313%. Even though they're the smallest little market share, I guess, on the whole list.
That is interesting. So this segues to my next question. Well,
Mhm.
something I want to know. Like, why do you think like what do you think has contributed in some of those growths and decline on those apps, social sites?
LinkedIn, because the job market situation for everybody is like really like everyone's either hopping jobs or very ambiguous and like that kind of thing. I think that's probably a huge thing for an up percentage on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
Be Real, obviously, I said it was brand new. I'm surprised that TikTok is actually up at all. That fascinates me. Huh. Yeah, hard to say. That more people are, because this is 2022 to 2023. Like I would have thought that TikTok is kind of already was going to plateau more so like in 2020, 2021. But interesting that that's up. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think after the pandemic, I always attributed for TikTok's growth as to how easy it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube has always been really intimidating for a lot of creators, especially sometimes for businesses because a lot of people view YouTube as the big boy. It is,
Mm-hmm.
if you're making YouTube videos, regardless of how the videos are coming out, that takes a lot of work. But TikTok, it's so easy.
Mm-hmm.
Even I play around with it. It's so easy to pick a sound, pick a filter, hold, and then you're good to go. It's literally it kind of functions similar to Snapchat because Snapchat's easy. The one app that I'm interested to see how it continues to grow is Be Real.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, a lot of people hopped on Be Real because of the narrative that it was the app where you can be authentic. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of like the counter to TikTok, where TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, everything is filtered, pre curated. People are putting on makeup before they go. Be Real is in the name. Be real, be you, be honest. But, every app kind of markets itself that way in some capacity. So
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to see that its growth has increased by 300%. I wonder if it can keep that, at least plateau there and maintain that, because I haven't seen a lot of Be Real in the social zeitgeist of conversation, unless
Mhm.
it's probably the niche group, but I haven't heard much about it.
Yeah, no, I have a few very young people who in my life who do that, but
Mhm.
other than that, like teenagers are more there right now, I think.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's kind of interesting. We were talking about engagement rates earlier and what kind of expectations are. Facebook 0.064% engagement rate as a percentage of your total followers.
Mm,
So insanely low. Like if you have 100 followers, maybe you'll get one person liking your thing, is what it says as an industry whole, or as a across the platform.
mm.
Instagram, like 10 times as high, but that's still only 0.67 percent. So again, if you have 100 people, 0.67 might like it. So you need 200 people to get one like, is what it's saying there. By post types, on Facebook, live video has the most engagement. Then images are next, and then regular videos are after that. On
Okay.
Instagram, carousels are the most engaged,
Yeah.
then by images, and then videos.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that that doesn't factor in reels specifically. It's just like videos in feed
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So that's interesting.
That is,
But yeah.
I didn't think, yeah, it's especially interesting since reading like, since Instagram's more prioritization of those reels, because sometimes they flop back and forth with the algorithm. So it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to hear that carousels, I mean, it's great for us, right? But it's interesting to hear how carousels are still doing really good. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
the easiest way to tell a story and bust out content, right? And it's a really good way to be creative with your brand too. Even LinkedIn, God, I'm not gonna lie, I am a since we're talking about carousels, let me explain. Like, I love LinkedIn carousels. When I see people do it, it's like, want to learn how to increase your B2B? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. I am even at the point where I like download some of their PDFs and stuff too to like save them for later. But I wonder if they mean like interactions on carousels. Is that even just swiping, or is it like a like and a share, right? Because it's I'm reading it here. It's not actually clear, but if you're just swiping side to side on a carousel and that's counting as engagement, I can see why they're much higher.
Yeah, I would maybe because I would think they would count as engagement as a like or comment,
Hmm.
right? Like, yet again, it goes back to the X thing. Like, if you're just swiping or going through, that
Hmm.
does that I don't think that counts as an engagement per se. But if they're looking at how, like, post time, how long you're spending
Hmm.
on the post, then maybe that could be right. Like, a lot of people spend a lot of time swiping through carousels, and usually 2 3 swipes you can
Yeah.
get them or they're done.
And just for clarity's sake, the word on this graph is interactions, not engagement. So
Mm,
I don't know how they're tracking it exactly, but that is maybe a little bit of a different term depending on how they're, yeah, defining it. And again, similar thing. I know back 5-ish years ago, Facebook got into trouble because their ad metrics were reporting that there was a lot of engagement on posts on the carousel ads.
mm.
Um, and so it was skewing everyone's numbers. They're like, well, why is there so much engagement, but nobody clicks to our site? Well, it's because they're scrolling through your thing, um, which is interesting, I guess.
That is
So yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
The word engagement is so interesting to me. I always think about that because how one company, people, social media marketer views engagement, how the other views engagement is
Hmm.
really, it's diverse. And if anyone there is listening too, how do you view it? Like, what do you define as engagement? I think that's a really good question. I know for me, I define engagement as likes, dislikes, comments. Um, that's me. I think, if you look at my post and then you don't like it and you're like, "Oh, I saw your post." And I'm like, "You didn't like it and you didn't engage with it? Okay, thanks for hurting my percentage."
Yeah, exactly. No, I feel you there. Well, and I think it's kind of, yeah, even words in general. Like we could do a whole episode on this on how like different people have different naming conventions for different words, and it can get very confusing if you're chatting with somebody else too. Just especially if you're new to that relationship, you're like, oh yeah, I mean this thing. It's like, no, I actually mean this thing. Here's our definition of it, which is strange how I mean, maybe that's just the English language in general, that we have different definitions for different words. We haven't 100% agreed, but it's super important when you're talking about like, hey, this is how I measured this KPI. It's different. Like a lead, for example. Some people are like, oh, it's just, a person on an email list. Well, but did they have to engage with you, or like, did they come to you, or did you just buy that email? And yeah, anyways, it's a whole thing. Could be a whole episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, that could be that's a TED talk.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, we wanted to wrap it up with whether it's worthwhile for businesses to be on social media with how aggressive things are right now, with how many people are there. What is actually what actually makes sense? Is it worthwhile?
That's a great question. I'll let you go first because I'm afraid my answer may conflict with each other.
That's okay. I mean, that's half the fun of this too, different perspectives. Yeah, I think like I alluded to at the beginning, you should be on one end of the spectrum of volume of content to quality of content, I guess. Not that you can't do high volume and high quality. It's more of a matrix in that sense. But yeah, if it's worthwhile for you, is what level of resources and effort can you put in, and what are you seeing out of that? And so if you are able to do like have the MVP, I guess I call it, of social media, where you're putting out 3 static posts a week that generally talk about tips about your business, and you don't look like you're a ghost town on social media. People understand your business is still open. Like that's like the bare minimum effort. You could be there. That might be what's worthwhile for you, and you can put your time and resources into something else. Or it might be worthwhile because you're an influencer and your entire brand is built on Instagram, and that's how you get your sales, and you're some sort of digital creator, and that makes sense. Then the, I guess, level of effort needed to build that brand is much higher, right? I mean, for my own example, marketing agencies are kind of always known for having bad websites and poor social media because we're stuck working on our clients' stuff. But that's okay because I get my clients through LinkedIn. And so that's kind of the one platform I focus on rather than having 100,000 followers on Instagram, right? So that's kind of my perspective on what's worthwhile.
I think it is always worthwhile to have something on social media because in this day and age, God, yeah, it's always worthwhile to have something on social media because it's the one way people are going to find you, you know. Because for some people, if you don't exist on social media, then you don't exist, right? Because if you're not on social media, then you have to be doing something to nurture and generate leads. Yet again, as you said, like marketing agencies, they're riding the line. They don't really have to be on social media because how they're gathering leads is going to be different, but how they're nurturing their leads is also going to be different too. So they exist within a market to their market, but they don't exist all out there. And sometimes that's fine, right? But I think for a company that's doing B2C, um, social media is always going to be your best friend. But in that case, if you don't really know if you have the time for social media, then I think just being on one for now and having some sort of a presence out there is really good.
Mm-hmm.
Because the one thing I want everybody to know is you can always go back to social media. Your first 50 to 100 posts are going to be so different than your next 50 to 100 and then the 20 because you're going to rebrand, redecorate, recreate, and you're going to be like, man, I did that like a year ago. It sucked. And now I did it again. It's going to be good. Then 2 years, you're going to be like, God, that still sucked. But now I'm better,
Yeah.
I think it's always good to be on social media. I think it's always worthwhile to be on social media. I think if you're not on social media, then how do you exist to everyone, Because I've worked with people who are like, I don't need a social media. And I'm like, that's great. That's fantastic. What else are you doing so people know you exist,
Yeah. No, that's fair. For sure. Got it. Yeah. Letting people know you exist is kind of obviously important, but I guess there's other ways. It doesn't have to be social media. There's, somebody Googles you, that's SEO. You have a Google business profile. Like there's, I don't know, tons of different options out there to drive traffic, which is now the third idea we have for a podcast.
Yeah, right. How to drive traffic
Yeah.
to your God. That's a big one, right?
Right there, for sure. Well, on that note, it was fantastic chatting. I hope all of our listeners got something valuable, or all of our future listeners got something valuable out of this podcast. And if you have any questions, feel free and leave them in the chat, and we will be happy to get back to you.
Yeah, please ask us anything. If you have any questions, if you want to hop on and ask us a question, please shoot us a comment, let us know.
Perfect.